I'd like to welcome you to our March 2018 Contemplative Education webinar, Enacting Human Revolution, the Inner Social Justice Movement with Kamilah Majied. Now I'd like to give you a little background about our presenter. Dr. Kamilah Majied has been a practicing Buddhist for 36 years. She has taught domestically and internationally about mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, mindfulness and racial justice, Buddhism and mental health, mindfulness practices as a path towards preserving the environment, and contemplative practices in education. She serves on the editorial board of the Journal of Religion and Spirituality and Social Work and is co-editor of a special issue on peace, healing, reconciliation, and nonviolent conflict resolution. Dr. Majied gave opening remarks at the first White House Conference of Buddhist Leaders on Climate Change and Racial Justice, where she also facilitated the dialogue on ending racism amongst the internationally represented Buddhist leadership. She's one of the original authors of the Buddhist People of Color Statement Calling for Racial Justice, published by Lion's Roar magazine. Dr. Majied serves as a facilitator for the North American Buddhist Alliance ongoing dialogues on Buddhism, mindfulness practices, and social justice. She is a mental health clinician, clinical educator, researcher, author, and international consultant on the impact of oppression on mental health. Her scholarship focuses on racism, sexism, homophobia, heterosexism, and other forms of social oppression. A member of the Association for the Contemplative Mind in Higher Education, Dr. Majied employs contemplative pedagogy and mindfulness practices in both clinical practice and education. I am thrilled to also share that she will be one of our leaders at this year's 14th annual summer session on contemplative learning in higher education. The summer session is a week-long intensive that prepares higher education professionals with resources to design and develop contemplative methods for their courses, create inclusive, inquiry-based learning environments, and incorporate contemplative awareness and practice within all aspects of higher education. You can learn more about the summer session on our website, and applications are due next Friday, March 16th, so you still have time to apply. We are extremely excited to have her with us today. Please welcome Kamilah.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for that warm welcome, Maya. And I want to extend my deepest appreciation to the Association of the Contemplative Mind in Higher Education, to C-Mind, and to Maya and Carrie and all of the wonderful supportive staff that have been so incredibly supportive in helping me to think about bringing this wonderful topic for discussion today. And I really, really deeply appreciate their assistance and so deeply appreciate the attendance of everyone here today. Just thank you for being here. I was asking Maya in the preparation for this if we would be able to see each other, because I love being able to see people and, you know, really communicate with my face and my smile. So hopefully you will be able to hear how delighted I am to be with all of you today and to think with and feel with all of you today about this topic of enacting our own inner social justice movement, our own inner human revolution. One thing I'd like to say, after just really expressing my appreciation for you for being with me here today, is that this idea of human revolution is one that was taught by many different Buddhist leaders, some of whom I will talk about today. But in the interest of full disclosure, I want to recognize that the concept of human revolution is a concept that grew out of Buddhist teachings. However, one does not have to be a Buddhist to understand and activate some of the principles and practices of human revolution. So I just want to say that just to recognize, one, where these teachings come from, because we definitely don't want to appropriate teachings or appropriate a philosophy without recognizing its roots and origins, but we also want to recognize the universal applicability of the concepts. So I say that to say that we are welcoming Buddhists and non-Buddhists alike to explore together as we discuss human revolution. So we're going to go to our very first slide, which really is about allowing ourselves to arrive and be welcome in this moment. It's 2:15 or so in the afternoon, and it's Friday, so I imagine that we're all coming from and perhaps going to, after this webinar, many things. So just for a moment, we want to take a moment to fully arrive here and to fully be here. So we're going to do that for about 5 minutes, actually. For the first 5 minutes, we're just going to allow ourselves to arrive and be welcomed. To begin this period of arriving, and to begin each period of reflection as we do reflective exercises throughout the webinar, I'm going to use a bell to begin the reflection and then a bell to close the reflection. I'll use a bell to begin the meditations, and then I'll use a bell to close them. So let's just begin an arrival meditation together with the sound of the bell. And then at the sound of the bell, we'll end our arrival meditation. If we can go to the next slide. So as we arrive, we're welcoming and noticing our bodies, noticing our neck, our shoulders. How do they feel? Let's bring them here. Let's bring our legs, our back, and our feet. Let's invite our body here and invite it to relax. Noticing places that feel good, breathing in gratitude for places in our body that feel good. Noticing places in our body that feel discomfort. And wrapping compassion around the places that feel discomfort. And then we can just notice our thoughts and welcome them. I've had thousands of thoughts as the day has moved forward. So on this arriving and welcoming meditation slide, you'll see lots of phrases. Noticing our thoughts, welcoming them without clinging to them. Just allowing our thoughts to arrive. We're not clinging to them. We're not pushing them away. Breathing in and out, We're noticing our emotions without clinging to them or pushing them away. Just notice them. Let ourselves arrive emotionally. Sending gratitude and kindness to ourselves as we continue to arrive. If you like, you can deepen the breath, taking a long, luxurious 4 or 5 second inhalation. And then a long, luxurious 4 or 5 second exhalation. Noticing that people are continuing to arrive. Our dear colleagues, those we know, those we don't know, coming in from their day, we can welcome them as we sit together, supporting each other across space and time, welcoming one another to this moment together. We arrive and we welcome ourselves. We arrive and we welcome each other. Thank you. So the next slide gives kind of an overview of the webinar as we're going to proceed today. I'm going to talk a little bit about a concept called discomfort resilience. And this is a concept that the Buddhist nun Pema Chodron talked about a lot. And basically, well, it's a good undergirding for understanding the concept of human revolution, because discomfort resilience allows us to turn towards uncomfortable situations and use them for transformation. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to talk a bit about what human revolution is, what's significant about it. We're going to talk about its relevance to educators and some guidelines for teachers trying to enact human revolution in themselves and in the classroom. And then we're going to talk very briefly about some of the historical roots and founding practitioners and teachers of human revolution. And then we'll talk about some of the ways to practice it, like how do you do it? And close with some of the benefits. So moving to the next slide. This is pretty much what discomfort resilience involves. It's the capacity to experience discomfort with interest and the growth to be gleaned from pain. Right? It's turning towards uncomfortable feelings, uncomfortable thoughts, uncomfortable sensations, boredom, anger, fatigue, and getting curious about what part of ourselves can be expanded by attending to them instead of turning away from them. The next slide talks about what happens when there is no discomfort resilience. What happens when there is no discomfort resilience? Individuals feel easily defeated and give up. A lot of psychologists and mental health clinicians also refer to it as frustration tolerance, right? And depending upon how much frustration we can tolerate, that often determines how far we are able to go in any given endeavor. So teachers and students certainly can't challenge themselves to learn if we're not able to push past our discomfort. It could be said that the process of learning itself is moving towards and facing the discomfort of not knowing, right? You can't be a learner without facing the discomfort of not knowing. And I think that that is part of the reason that students can find the educational system and educational processes to be challenging. And in terms of how workplaces can be impacted by a lack of discomfort resilience, I don't know if anybody's ever worked in a place, an academic institution where people complain. You've never heard of that, I'm sure, but there are some out there, and there are some where the culture of complaint is dominant as opposed to a culture of, constructive feedback and a culture of innovation. And having discomfort resilience be a component of the psychology of an organization or an academic institution can be transformative on an institutional level. So helping employees, helping academicians, helping students develop discomfort resilience can go a long way towards reforming and revolutionizing an institution as well. The next slide says a little more about greeting discomfort with curiosity and some of the steps we can take towards doing that, some discomfort resilience steps. Noticing the discomfort, and instead of doing something to distract ourselves from it or get away from it, we can turn towards it and see what's uncomfortable. What about it makes us uncomfortable? What's the feeling that's being triggered? We can consider that there might be something for us to learn from engaging with the uncomfortable feeling, the uncomfortable thought, or the uncomfortable idea. So for the next exercise, the first exercise, I want to actually do a 30-second reflection on your experience with discomfort resilience. So the slide you should see in front of you says, reflection on your experience with discomfort resilience. And what I'm inviting you to do is consider a time when you challenged yourself to do something, explore something, or discuss something uncomfortable and grew from it. How would you describe what you gained from that experience in one word? Just take actually about 10 seconds to think about one time. Often when I ask people that question, they say, well, I gained courage because I didn't think I could face that. Or I gained humility because I realized there was something I didn't know. The next slide, this meditation on discomfort resilience, invites you to think more specifically about it with reference to a student. Consider what students you enjoy teaching the least. I think as teachers, we like to think we enjoy teaching every type of student, and we have never had a student that was a challenge or uncomfortable to engage with. But if you have ever had one or have one now, I invite you to just envision them in your mind and turn towards them with appreciation and consider, what would it be like to delight in this relationship? What could I gain from turning towards this uncomfortable relationship? So I'm going to ring the bell, and we're going to take about 20 seconds so that everyone has an opportunity to just reflect on a challenging student relationship or collegial relationship and consider what it would be like to turn towards that. So part of the process of enacting human revolution means doing just that, taking a look at what I can gain, how I can grow from this experience that makes me uncomfortable. The next slide talks about how the human challenge is the human revolution, right? We're immersed in this society, in this world that really is centered around avoiding discomfort and relative happiness rather than absolute happiness. Relative happiness is dependent upon things going well, getting what we want. But absolute happiness is not subject to the same variability because it's not dependent upon external pleasures or external comforts. So in working to develop and to advance our human revolution, we're striving to experience absolute happiness, which requires that we turn towards discomfort. And in doing so, we're able to move towards our greater self, which is capable of caring deeply for ourselves, others, and all of humanity. We can think about our difficulties as the muddy swamp from which the flower of our enlightenment blooms. The next slide, What is Human Revolution?, has a depiction of a lotus flower on it. The lotus flower is symbolic in Buddhism for many reasons, and one of them is because it blooms from a muddy swamp, symbolizing the growth and beauty that can emerge from the muck. The term human revolution was coined by José Toda, who used the term to express a central idea of Nichiren Daishonin Buddhism, which is that all people are capable of attaining enlightenment. Enlightenment is the ability to see reality clearly and engage with it in a way that is completely present and that moves everything in a positive direction. Toda also asserted that an individual's inner transformation, this human revolution, can actively change circumstances around us and environments around us. And I think many of us have seen that sometimes if we shifted internally, that caused a shift in how others responded to us. The next slide has a quote that contextualizes human revolution in the context of the kinds of revolutions that we're more used to hearing about, right? There are all sorts of revolutions: political revolutions, economic revolutions, industrial revolutions, scientific revolutions, artistic revolutions. But no matter what one changes, the world will never get any better as long as people themselves remain selfish and lacking in compassion. In that respect, human revolution is the most fundamental of all revolutions, and at the same time, the most necessary revolution for humankind. And that's from renowned teacher and educator Daisaku Ikeda. The next slide talks about the significance of human revolution. And again, it's focused on a view of life based on understanding the eternity of life rather than a short-sighted pursuit of worldly goals, aiming at a way of life that maximizes life's meaning and the value we can create in our lives. Toda talked about how wanting to become rich or, even change aspects of your character is more focused on relative happiness, as opposed to absolute happiness, which is an inner state of life that cannot be destroyed by external influences. It's described in another writing as a state where one experiences joy in living, joy in the earth, joy in the faces and movements of people. Everything is colored with joy from the experience of an enlightened person. And the really exciting part about this is that you don't have to become a transcendent being, that human beings can experience enlightenment as part of their day, that it is not a permanent state, that, we transition in and out of moments of enlightenment, but that we can definitely work towards it becoming our most enduring life state. The next slide talks about the relevance of human revolution to educators. Noted author and feminist activist Bell Hooks talked about how the heart of education as a practice of freedom, being focused on the promotion of growth, right? And in her book, Teaching to Transgress, she talks about how schools are often, especially for marginalized populations, girls, people of color, but in many ways for everyone, places where freedom is compromised as opposed to having people be empowered. So her work really looks at how we transform educational institutions into sites for liberation, as does the work of Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire says, education must begin with the solution of the student-teacher contradiction by reconciling the poles of the contradiction so that both are simultaneously teachers and students. The next slide, Bell Hooks offers another thought for us. As a classroom community, we can commit our capacity to generate excitement, as it is deeply affected by our interest in hearing one another. In hearing one another's voices, we're able to recognize one another's presence. The next slide contains some guidelines to teachers on how to enact human revolution in the classroom. The first thing we have to do is allow ourselves to arrive, to get there, physically, emotionally, spiritually, cognitively, not necessarily in that order, but really giving ourselves a moment to arrive. And as we're always, moving from one thing to another, it can be hard to stop and just arrive. But to the extent that we do so, we're able to set an intention for the class as opposed to just running in and starting it. Coming in, welcoming ourselves, letting ourselves arrive, and asking ourselves, what's the intention for the class? Is there anything I can do in this context that will enhance my own human revolution, my own growth? Is there anything I can do that can enhance the students' empowerment and liberation? In addition to delivering of content, can we create this space for liberation and growth and transformation? And then we allow the students to arrive on all those levels. The arrival meditation that I did with you all at the beginning is actually one I use in the classroom to help students to be present. Also, I encourage students to notice any anxieties that they have, not clinging to them, not letting them, be pushed away, not pushing them away, but also not clinging to them. Noticing any fear of speaking they might have, not noticing it, not clinging to it, not pushing it away, just noticing it. Noticing what they feel about the material. And I found that it helps them get very grounded. Another thing that helps in terms of the classroom is really encouraging students to recognize what they do know. I find that particularly when I ask questions, students can often have an automatic, I don't know response. One of the ways I think we can enact human revolution in the classroom is to encourage students to notice that they do know. To say, you might know, or if you did know, what would you know? Or if you know anything about this at all, what would it be? And to let them hang out with the discomfort of looking inward a little bit and turn towards that to see what they can uncover that they know. Our tendency, at least, the tendency of myself and a lot of other educators I know, is to jump in and tell them the answer, to keep the class moving. But rather than doing that, I often invite the entire class to let's just sit together for 10 seconds and support student B as she thinks about it. And more often than not, the student comes up with one or two reflections on the subject matter. So that's another way that I kind of enact this practice in the classroom of allowing people to push past the self-doubt, turn towards the discomfort, and transform that discomfort into a process of unearthing what they know. And of course, when we engage as both the learner and the teacher, the process of teaching is transformative for us. And then, of course, we encourage the students to teach. Tell us a little bit about that. Share your thoughts about that. Take a moment and share your thoughts about that. When I do that in the classroom, give them the opportunity to teach a little bit, I see that as very transformative for students. The next slide is moving into a little bit of a historical overview of both Buddhism and some of its historical founders, including Shakyamuni. But I'm going to kind of skip through that for the sake of time. I think it will be available for you to come back. I think most people know that Shakyamuni was a prince, but who left the princely life to, actually turn towards suffering and see what aspects of human suffering could be explored to grow wisdom. And the next slide talks about another historical figure, Nichiren Daishonin, who expounded upon the teachings of Shakyamuni and really advanced the practice of chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, which is the title of the Lotus Sutra and the essence of the Lotus Sutra, as the Buddha taught, as a mechanism for enacting one's human revolution. So after the Nichiren Daishonin slide, there's a slide that says ways to practice human revolution. And one of those ways is the actual chanting of this phrase, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, with the goal of manifesting our enlightenment. And what that means is looking at whatever circumstances we have now and facing them fully and considering what would it be like to apply enlightened wisdom which already exists in our lives to those situations. Human revolution also includes study and reflecting on the teaching and encouraging others, and mining difficulty, like digging in the dirt or the dust of difficulty for opportunities for growth. The next slide talks about the meaning of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. That Nam comes from namas, meaning to devote or dedicate oneself. Myo can be translated as wonderful, and Ho means law. Renge, that lotus blossom that grows in the muddy swamp, which is also significant in Buddhism because it flowers and seeds at the same time, symbolizing the simultaneity of cause and effect. And Kyo, which means sutra or sound that permeates life and the entire universe. So the next slide shows people actually chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. So what I'd like us to do is to try it for about 10 seconds. I'm going to ring the bell and say the phrase, and you can say it with me because no one can hear you, so you don't have to worry about whether you get it right. And as we chant the phrase, I invite you to consider one or two challenges that you're facing, turning towards them in your mind and considering what it would be like to face it with your enlightened wisdom. As we chant this phrase, let that be what's in your mind, facing a challenge with enlightened wisdom. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Perhaps for this, it would be best to go back to the previous slide so everyone can see meaning of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo slide so that everyone can see the full phrase as we practice saying it together. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. 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 Thank you. The next slide talks about practicing human revolution as a process of seeking both the causes and the solutions to our problems within our own lives. That we actually have the answers, right? That the enlightened wisdom exists within us, but that we get to reach for it and manifest it through our practice. The next slide, in terms of the benefits of human revolution, there are many, and there are many more than are listed here, but enlightened wisdom is one of them. Increased empathy, purposeful reflection, increased mental strength, that discomfort resilience, that frustration tolerance that we're talking about, increased self-discipline. This next slide is actually our last. And it's a quote that I'd actually like us to take a moment and read together. Education makes us free. It is through education that we are liberated from powerlessness, from the burden of mistrust directed at ourselves. The individual who has been liberated from self-doubt, one who has learned to trust in him or herself, is naturally able to believe in the latent capacities of others. One becomes able to look beyond the present appearance of another, to perceive and believe in the wondrous treasures hidden within. I think this is a wonderful quote for educators because many of us have had experiences in the process of our own education, whether it was in preschool or college, 5th grade or high school, that were less than liberating. And I think it's useful for us to consider what ways our experience of education has been oppressive. Because if we don't, then we may not be able to see ways that we are enacting oppressive practices as educators. So what I'd like for us to do for the last meditation of the day is to just take 30 seconds to consider, in what ways was I oppressed in my process of being educated? And what oppressive practices might I eliminate from my experience of teaching students? And as I say that, I want to really emphasize that, we never mean to be oppressive towards students. Like, I think about, for example, even when I want students to just settle and be quiet, I realize that I'm interrupting a very natural process, which is them engaging with one another. So as you reflect on this, I invite you to really be very gentle with yourself and notice the ways your educational experience may have been oppressive, and consider, how can my experience of educating others be more liberating than it already is? Let's reflect on that together for 10 seconds. Thank you. So with that, I will move to the final slide that says thank you, and just say how deeply I appreciate having the opportunity to think with you in a webinar format about human revolution and share some of the concepts, and to say to you that I am so deeply interested in your ideas and your questions, and I want to use the rest of the time for that. That there is a works cited slide at the end of this presentation, but there's a tremendous body of literature and information on all of the concepts that I've talked about here today that I'm happy to share more resources with you all about. So with that, I'll hand it back to Maya so that we can take any questions.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, questions or
comments?
So thank you so much, Kamilah, for sharing your work with us. And I have to say, even via webinar where we can't see you, you certainly have a remarkable presence. So that was really, truly wonderful. And as Kamilah mentioned, this is the time for you to submit any questions that you'd like me to read aloud. I did see some popping up throughout the webinar, so I will mention those as well. And I'm just going to give you guys 1-ish minute to submit your questions now.
Oh, great. If we don't have a question right now, should I share a thought?
You can share a thought. We do have questions. I'm just,
Oh,
yeah, not to say there aren't any questions, but you can absolutely share a thought.
that's okay. I'll work it in as part of an answer.
Okay. Okay, I can get started. Actually, there's quite a few building up here. So there were a few responses to some of the prompts that you shared with us. There was just a thank you for sharing the arrival practice, which I know we probably all needed. And someone, I think, was responding to one of the first prompts about what emotion or what feeling came up during one of the reflection meditations, and that was calm.
That's great.
So one of the first questions that came in is, and maybe this is something that came up for more than one person, just to be clear, is discomfort the same thing as pain?
I think they can be considered along the lines of degree. If you are in extreme discomfort, then I think that pretty much qualifies as pain. But when I say discomfort resilience, I mean having the capacity to increase the degree to which we can turn towards pain. So I say that to say that yes, you can use the word, you can switch the word pain there, but what I don't want you to think is that I'm saying all pain is great. Let's just be in pain all the time. That's not what I'm saying. Well, of course, if we are in a situation that's causing physical or emotional pain and we recognize it as unhealthy, right? And that there is nothing good to be gained about being in this painful situation. For example, if my foot is stuck in the door, I don't need to keep it stuck in the door to see how I can grow from that pain. I need to take my foot out of the door. We don't need to stay in a painful situation just to endure the pain and to to suffer. But if we are in a situation from which we cannot escape, right, then we get to use the pain of that situation to say, okay, I'm in this. If my foot is stuck in the door and I can't get out, that I'm going to have to wait for someone to come and get me out. I was stuck in an elevator once, so I kind of had an opportunity to practice this. Then what is there that I can notice if I turn towards the discomfort? So for example, that elevator situation where I was extremely uncomfortable because I'm somewhat claustrophobic, and I turned towards the discomfort because I had to stay in what was for me a very painful situation. I couldn't escape it at the moment. So I used the time to turn towards the discomfort and say, well, what could I get if I was able to master, even just for the short time that I'm going to have to, this extreme pain and anxiety I feel about being trapped in this place. So we don't need to seek out pain, but if there is unavoidable discomfort in our lives, or if there is an uncomfortable situation that could have the opportunity for growth, then we want to turn towards it. And it's only when we reflect on the painful situation that we can make a good decision about that. I mean, you can think of a marriage this way, like looking at a marriage. Okay, there's pain in it, but is there an opportunity for growth, or is it just pain with no opportunity for growth. But giving ourselves the pause to reflect and turn towards the discomfort allows us to see if there's anything of value to be gained from not just leaving. Does that answer that question? I hope so.
I think so. The next question is, and I think this was in response to talking about students, encouraging students to not cling to their anxieties. The question is, how can they not cling to the anxieties? So, how do you help them let go of them?
That's a great question. It really is, especially because, especially because even trying to help students to meditate in the classroom brings up anxiety for them, because something about the pace of school and the pace that most students have become accustomed to in school, there is nothing about it that involves slowing down and relaxing. So just the idea of slowing down to relax and, give yourself a minute to think feels like, for them, they're going to be like, well, everybody's looking at me while I'm thinking. And, so they start having, little bits of social phobia and social anxiety and all of that. So, but again, what I encourage them to do is to turn towards it. And there are degrees to which students are going to be able to do this. I think that we get to meet people where they are and, respect people's willingness to step out on this ledge of discomfort resilience. But what I often do is I model it for them. I'll be talking and then I'll stop talking for 10 seconds and just breathe, do deep breathing exercises and say, I'm going to just calm myself internally and do some deep breathing while you all stare at me, and then I do it. And then they see me navigate that, and then they're often more willing to try it. So in answer to how I get the students to manage their anxiety is I tell them to take a few deep breaths, and I have the entire class, invite the entire class to take a few deep, luxurious 4-second inhalation, 4-second exhalation breaths while we support our colleague in thinking. And as the class community, class tends to build community, students feel less anxiety about it as time goes on. But the first couple of times, it's us, the educators, who have to tolerate the discomfort of teaching the students something that's going to make them uncomfortable. So we all get to, build our discomfort resilience together. But one of the things that really helps is the deep breathing, because of course that relaxes the hippocampus and the central nervous system so that the students are able to just get some calm, and that helps with the anxiety as well.
Thank you. The next question is, can you speak a bit about how to present and work with these ideas in a secular way? The person asking the question is working in a public college.
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, I don't generally talk about Buddhism because I was teaching about this particular concept of human revolution, which I think is, which is very profound and has many more layers than I was able to talk about in our short time today, but which really undergirds how I try to teach. I think that we can just talk to students about the concepts such as inner transformation. For example, whatever discipline you're teaching, whatever the field of study, the student wants to have a sense of mastery around it. But the greatest form of mastery they can have is mastery of their discomfort about what they don't know, right? That if they can feel completely comfortable with unknowing, then their anxiety about the topic fades. And then there's just curiosity. And when they don't know something, there's more curiosity. So I think that is one of the ways that we can help students use the idea of discomfort resilience and human revolution without referring to any religious without making any religious references. Again, in deference to our understanding of cultural appreciation, I think it is important when students, especially if students ask follow-up questions, to say honestly, where these ideas originate from, particularly as a lot of the Buddhist teachings and ideas originate in the East and from people of color. There's a lot of discussion of how that's being co-opted in Western society with almost no acknowledgement of some of the Asian origins of a lot of this thought. So that's why I think it's important to, when we can, acknowledge that, because it acknowledges the breadth of human experience that has contributed to understanding of ways of being in the world. But I think we absolutely can just help students to recognize that their internal freedom, their liberation as scholars and thinkers and practitioners of whatever discipline you're trying to teach them, is enhanced by their ability to turn towards their own discomfort and release it, and look in that discomfort for, how can I grow? What am I afraid of? What is this anxiety telling me? So that every course you're teaching, whether it's chemistry or calculus or psychology or social work, becomes an opportunity for the student to experience this sense of liberation and the sense of empowerment.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to do a quick time check. I know we started a little bit late, and again, we apologize for that. I think that, Kamilah, if you're comfortable with it, we'll take 2 more questions.
Sounds good.
Okay, and so the next one is, how do you introduce these concepts to students who may be unfamiliar with them or skeptical of them?
Well, I think you can start very simply by saying to students that, breathing is good for you and it helps you calm down. So doing deep breathing exercises is one of the things we'll start class with, just to help everyone relax and settle. Right? That you don't have to close your eyes if you don't want to. The only reason we close our eyes is to turn our vision inward, right? Eyes and sight are a wonderful gift, but there's lots of stimuli when you have your eyes open. In order to see what's happening internally, that's often why people close their eyes in meditation. But they can also keep their eyes open. When people chant, they keep their eyes open. So I think, the most normalizing aspect of deep breathing, the easiest aspect to communicate about deep breathing, is that it actually has a physiological impact of calming the central nervous system. So I think telling students that as the scientific basis for why we are beginning the class with deep breathing is a very benign way of helping them understand why you're doing it, that you just are inviting them to settle. And then the other pieces about welcoming and inviting themselves, I think what you can say to people is that sometimes we're only partly here. And I think that really resonates with students, that they may be physically there, but and they may even be cognitively there. They may even be able to be thinking about the material, but they may be emotionally somewhere else. And that may not shift just because they notice it, but the process of noticing it allows them to be more present. And yeah, I think it's one of the things that there's lots of literature on the utility of using meditation practices or mindfulness practices and deep breathing practices in the classroom, but without giving them a whole lot to read about it, I think you can just say those kinds of things to them about, really, the purpose of it is simply for them to be able to relax and focus. The purpose of it is for them to be at ease in their learning experience and to feel free in their learning experience. Like, when I present it to them, I'm like, this is for you to feel at ease and free and liberated in this classroom, in this time, and in this space together. And when it's presented that way, they feel like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll try it.
So I just have to say, there's so many really great questions that are coming in. And again, I apologize that we can't answer all of them together with Kamilah. So I think the last question that I'm going to share and present to you is, can you say a little bit more about applying discomfort resilience to social justice contexts?
Absolutely. Well, the thing that makes social justice hard is that everybody wants to be comfortable and people have different comfort zones, right? So, what is necessary to achieve social justice is that we step out of our comfort zone and expand our notion of what social justice is. So, for example, if I'm working for the rights of children, am I also able to think about the rights of adolescents, right? And what about when the rights of children and adolescents are in conflict with one another? What if this is what the advocates for the rights, A is what the advocates for the rights of children are saying, and B is what the advocates of rights for adolescents are saying, and they don't jibe. Discomfort resilience means I can tolerate and am actually interested in the conversation and the opinions of those who firmly disagree with me. Reverend Angel Kiddo Williams has a wonderful book, Radical Dharma, that talks a little bit about just this, about turning towards having conversations with people who one profoundly disagrees with, and developing a vision of social justice that's inclusive of the dialogue that emerges from both people or all people transforming. So the key to social justice is not my opinion. The key to social justice is the perspective that we're able to arrive at collaboratively, with the one caveat being that the dignity of human life is always valued and respected. So the way that discomfort resilience applies to social justice endeavors is that when if there's a social justice topic that you're interested in and a social justice topic that you are not interested in, that you will actually do some reading about the social justice topic that you are not interested in, so that you can expand your vision of social justice, right? So if I'm interested in environmental justice, but not so much interested in LGBTQ issues, then I'm going to see if I'm going to explore my discomfort. Why am I uncomfortable with that? Or it could be the other way around, right? I'm a social scientist, so it took some time for me to start engaging in the environmental justice movement. And I realized that that was about my discomfort with my level of knowledge around the natural sciences. But then once I pushed past that discomfort, feeling like I didn't know enough about natural sciences to be engaged in the climate justice movement, then I really got interested. And then I started to learn more about natural sciences and climate justice. So in terms of how we use discomfort resilience to advance social justice, I would say turn towards the social justice issues that you feel least inclined to turn towards, or that bring up the most guilt or the most shame or the most fear or the most self-doubt, and say to yourself, maybe I could learn something if I explored this. How could I grow? How could my human revolution advance if I turn towards a social justice issue?
I really feel like that's just the perfect way to close this webinar. Again, Kamilah, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your work with us, and to everyone who is listening, thank you for joining us today. I also want to say I'm so looking forward to continuing to work with you, Kamilah. If anyone missed it, Kamilah will be one of the leaders at the 2018 summer session this summer. And to remind everyone, this webinar has been recorded and will be available on the website soon. Our webinars are made possible by your support, and we invite you all to make a donation and check out our webinar archive at www.contemplativemind.org. Thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.